We'll explore the topic of racism in psychological and developmental sciences within the University of California system and UC Santa Cruz's social science department, exploring how the field must be systematically restructured to foster diversity, equity, and inclusivity in Santa Cruz County. This video would be one relevant for professors, teaching assistants, and faculty involved within this field who have the power to make significant changes but need the foundation of knowledge to do so. Furthermore, this is a video for my peers in psychology who are actively conducting research, as well as any other active members of the social sciences field here at the University of Santa Cruz. Psychology is the window into all mental processes and behavior. So why is it that the field is rooted in inherently racist practices that perpetuate discrimination and marginalize Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC? The University of California, Santa Cruz has many diverse strategies currently in place, but are the current initiatives enough to repair racism's damage across multi-systemic levels? The first resource being discussed here is by Nicole Buchanan and others, titled Upending Racism in Psychological Science, focusing on epistemic oppression's strong roots within the field of psychology and enumerating 25 actionable steps to dismantle white supremacy and move towards a diversified scientific field. This source identifies how stakeholders in the psychology field have the power to make changes on multi-systemic levels and suggests potential solutions and courses of action. The majority of current psychological research takes place on the undergraduate and graduate level, with the student body mostly being white. This is why the psychology field here at UC Santa Cruz is a crucial place for diversified practices in psychology. Within the steps enumerated in the article, a framework is created for restructuring language used in reporting and documentation, changing the way science is reported by reworking editing teams and advisory boards, protocols, mentoring, redefining race contextually, diversifying samples, and intentionally using linguistics to actively include BIPOC. As Buchanan states, it is undeniable that psychology is a founding pillar of humanity that aims to understand and guide efforts toward improving the thoughts, attitudes, behaviors, emotions, and abilities of all humans, and only when epistemic oppression is eliminated will this discipline have an opportunity to achieve this goal. These inequalities must be addressed across all levels and layers of psychology for a sense of union to be found amongst all ethnicities, and in this video we are focusing on the responsibility that falls upon UC Santa Cruz's psychology department. The second resource discussed here is by Shauna Cooper and others, titled Advancing Scholarship on Anti-Racism with Developmental Science, and it depicts the extent to which children's upbringings influence their attitudes towards BIPOC through scientific experimentation and research, uncovering the formative effects that parents have on their children's development and displaying how psychological methodology can be used and taught in universities to analyze its own racial histories, their implications, and where racism actually originates. How can we intervene now while college students are still at a very impressionable stage in their development? Focusing on the consequences of racism is insufficient, and attention must be turned towards the actual development of racism in humans. Not only does the field of psychology possess deeply multisystemically racial bias, but so do most human beings themselves. This is not merely about restructuring the field of psychology, that is the second step. This is about applying the lens of developmental psychology to the field itself and understanding the likelihood of stakeholders themselves having identities founded on implicitly racist principles. Suddenly, the difficulty of the situation proves a lot more severe. Reworking the field must start from the bottom up, beginning on an individual level and growing from there. How can we, as individuals, recognize our own biases stemming from our upbringings and deconstruct them? By observing our current behaviors and our family's behavior before us, we can begin to formulate an understanding of how we were taught to view BIPOC and how, comparatively, they deserve to be treated in contrast. This is where the decentralization of Eurocentric fields of psychology begins. Cooper concludes that this paper's research demonstrates the possibility for developmental science to address critical questions surrounding the development of, precursors to, and outcomes associated with anti-racism in youth.
We really cannot talk about health equity unless we're talking about racial equity, because we know that racism and discrimination is threaded throughout the social determinants of health, and that's what really drives health disparities. And so in order for us to really make a difference and have the impact, it can't just be psychologists that's making the difference. And it just can't be psychologists who are really advocating with health disparities, but we have to have all the voices of psychology for this to really make a difference.
Interestingly, in a study discussed in the source, parents were found to believe that conversations of power, privilege, whiteness, and politics should be avoided. We're so unafraid of uncomfortable topics that it creates total blind spots in kids' development and perceptions. Henceforth, these topics of discussion should not be avoided within the university setting. This source proves that there is an absolute correlation between youth's upbringing and their levels of implicit racial bias, urging readers to reflect on their own built-in racist ideals around BIPOC and end the generational transfer of racism. On the university level, professors, staff, and fellow students have the perfect opportunity and grounds to rewire their thinking and educate the people around them. The third resource focused on here is by Andrea L. Miller and others, titled Forging Diversity Science-Informed Guidelines for Research on Race and Racism in Psychological Science. It highlights 5 actionable steps for industry-wide change that dives into more detailed explanations than the first source. In order to avoid the above-mentioned westernized convenience samples and narrow-minded research findings, we must start where the samples themselves are taken. Most research is done on the graduate and undergraduate level at universities and institutions, where the majority of psychology students are white. These research institutions and organizations must propose new regulations that allow for rearranged studies and potentially elongated experiments to allow for the collection of diverse participants and researches, etc. UCLA and UIC have adopted intentional diversity studies in their programs. So why haven't other UC universities done the same? Why isn't UC Santa Cruz? How can we pride ourselves on diversity when we are not adopting anti-racist initiatives in our research? Currently, UCSC is home to a variety of diversity organizations and initiatives. The Student Union Assembly focuses on outreach and community engagement to foster inclusion and a sense of belonging. The Student Diversity and Inclusion programs serve to educate students around diversity and inclusion efforts, creating role models that will improve overall student life and collaborate with other universities and programs to foster equity and diversity. The school is also home to a DEI department. All of these programs are centered broadly around students' general quality of life and community, though rather than specific departments that could use reworking. As a school that prides itself on its diverse student body, UCSC has the prime opportunity to do its part diversifying scientific research and introducing BIPOC voices into the fourth source is titled Textual Analysis, Black Students' Perceptions of Respect at a Public University Campus by Ibarra J. and Anderson A., addressing the under-researched realm of unequal perceptions of racial respect within the UC system as a whole, identifying the significant causes of outgrouping and enumerating steps towards change. Even though there are institutional initiatives around diversity and the UC system does attract a broad body of BIPOC, student and faculty still have unaddressed implicit racial bias that prevents the integration into university communities and fosters ostracization, microaggressions, and all of the depressive after effects that follow. Only 4% of UC faculty are Black, leaving Black students with hardly any outlets, role models, or confidants. There's such little BIPOC representation in undergraduate and graduate research. This source pins the cause to be a lack of Black staff members to facilitate more diverse studies and promote diverse research groups, or offered varied perspectives and support to their students. Although UCSC is one of the most diverse colleges in the United States, there is still a lack of a sense of community amongst BIPOC, and as a result, less student efficacy in getting involved. The main stakeholder in my research is UC Santa Cruz, which falls under the umbrella of the University of California. More specifically, I'm focusing on the Department of Psychology here at UCSC, which is home to all of the graduate and undergraduate students publishing research on psychology and potentially excluding BIPOC voices. In an interview with Kathy Montano, a staff member of the Psychology Department at UCSC and the Psychology Graduate Program Coordinator since 2018, she states that the campus has not offered the Diversity and Inclusion Certification programming available to staff since before the onset of the pandemic. This is one of the few educational opportunities where staff are able to commit their time to learning and strengthening their approaches to topics related to DEI. The second stakeholder within my fault line is City on a Hill Press, a weekly student-run newspaper local to UC Santa Cruz, up to date on current events and issues. City on a Hill Press discusses important matters of racism, anti-racism, and diversity, and is referenced in the scholarly articles I've used as sources for this project. White supremacy is steering Black voices out of spaces that dictate media, education, and lawmaking, author Kira Bradley discusses in an article published in 2018. The UC student body is detailed as one that gathers most of their knowledge on Black people and people of color from the media, generalizing entire ethnicities into stereotypical categories and promoting the idea that BIPOC are outsiders, not as welcomed or embraced by white students as other white students are. UCSC has many initiatives and programs to involve students who choose to get involved. Yes, much progress has been made over the past several years, but the core issues have not improved. The UC system is heavily understaffed in terms of people of color and must first address this crucial aspect before they wonder why students struggle finding role models, representation, kinship, and community on campus. The third stakeholder for this project is the American Psychological Association, or the APA.
At the RAND Corporation, we look to the APA often for the resources that they develop, for the ways in which they influence not only the way that we think about psychology and mental health, which is a huge issue that we have in the United States, but abroad. I think it's critical for us to think that the way the APA influences not only psychology, but also broadly health equity and writ large other interdisciplinary areas.
or the APA. The APA is one of the leading psychology foundations in the U.S., publishing a large quantity of didactic material to educate the public on all categories of psychology. The APA approaches diversity with the knowledge that the field of psychology has a great, unique power to dismantle multisystemic biases that are barriers to equality and inclusivity. They have a surplus of initiatives and research published to implement diversity into every aspect of their practice and organization as a whole. The Department of Santa Cruz would greatly benefit from modeling their practices around the ones of organizations like APA. The fourth stakeholder within this fault line is UC Santa Cruz's Psychology Department and Department of Social Sciences, more specifically. Racism within psychology occurs most often within undergrad and graduate research, as that's where the U.S. establishes the majority of contemporary knowledge on human development, behavior, and psychology, as most research takes place on this level. Therefore, with my fault line being Santa Cruz County, this department holds the greatest power and opportunities to include BIPOC voices in research. In an interview with Zach Keith, a queer graduate of psych, published on the UCSC's website Spotlight on Diversity section, he describes the environment as a safe haven, but one with room for improvement. Firstly, the school's partnerships with outside organizations have diverted funds from the department in unhelpful directions, highlighting an inequity between UCSC's science department and the psychology department. This seems to be targeting queer and BIPOC communities. They also advocate for the implementation of visibility efforts such as filling the currently barren walls with art and media that showcase the buildings as a safe space and implementing pronouns into community guidelines. If the world's window into the mind is solely white, how will any person from any other walk of life come to understand one another? The field of psychology and developmental science is rooted in a long history of epistemic racial oppression towards minorities, perpetuated by a blissful ignorance of how today's research is conducted through a Eurocentric lens that silences voices of any color. Moving forward, small and large-scale change must be made to revitalize the field's diversity and allow for BIPOC's broad range of rich cultural perspectives and experiences to be factored into psychological research, and, furthermore, be heard and understood. The knowledge that much of our widely held beliefs are founded upon theories derived from research done majorly on white people must prompt a complete re-examination of our belief systems. So, how will psychologists move forward with this knowledge, and how will epistemic change occur on the undergraduate and graduate level? Take part in college-level research and have a voice that's heard, or risk a society that only understands the white mind.